listening to Pat Cashman. He's the answer to the question, who moved my cheese?
And
we've done it once again.
Today, nationally syndicated cartoonist and local resident Brian Basset with us this morning. Brian, pleasure to have you here. You write the column Adam?
Correct.
And
well, it's not really a column.
Cartoon.
It's a cartoon.
It's a comic strip.
I'm wrong. Yeah, it's a strip.
Right.
It's a strip. I don't know if we can say strip on the radio.
Yeah, you're right.
I was a little punchy about that. And Red and Rover.
Right.
Now tell us about Red and Rover.
Red and Rover is a relatively new strip. It began running in papers just a year ago, May 7th. And it's what we call a retro feel strip. It's a time and place very reminiscent of the late 60s, early 70s, although there are no specific strips that say that. There are no computers, there are no cell phones. And the overlying or underlying theme throughout the whole thing is friendship and loyalty. It's a time when going to the moon and NASA rocks. It's
fun.
Yeah, it is. Gee.
And that's kind of when you grow up too.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now when you and we'll do back up a little bit here and how you became to be a cartoonist. Your father, I understand, was a political cartoonist.
He was. He was many things. Right after World War II, he began his career as a sports and theatrical cartoonist with the old Brooklyn Eagle. Both my parents are from Brooklyn, and my dad used to cover the Dodgers during the day and Broadway at night.
He was a sports cartoonist?
Sports and theatrical. Sports cartooning was in its heyday in the 40s and 50s. In fact, my father's mentor was the dean of what's called sports cartoonists, a man by the name of Willard Mullen, who created the Brooklyn the Bum. The Dodger Bum, yeah.
That's cool.
And so he worked in Brooklyn and Boston, and I was born in New England in the mid-50s, and a few years later my dad got into political cartooning, and he worked for Scripps Howard newspapers out of Washington, D.C. for 20-some years. That's where I was raised, in the D.C. area.
And that was his full-time gig?
Yeah, it was. And I wanted to follow very much in his footsteps and be a political cartoonist, and that was my real job here in Seattle for about 16 years. And I had no knowledge or desire of doing a comic strip.
Were you a political person? I mean, did you follow politics closely?
Oh, you couldn't help but follow politics closely growing up in the D.C. area, especially during Watergate, when half your school's parents, your fellow students' parents were being indicted.
Yeah.
And I used to sit behind this girl in algebra class whose father was head of the whole GOP, and so I used to do these little lewd drawings of Richard Nixon and pass them up to her, and just to get her little shriek.
This is what I want to do. I want to make people shriek.
That's right.
Brian Basset with us this morning. Let's check the roads again right now, though. Here is Paul Tosh. We're spending some time with Brian Basset, who is a great cartoonist, of course, for many years as the editorial cartoonist with the Seattle Times, and now probably most noted as the writer and creator of Adam, and more recently Red and Rover, and I want to talk to you about both of those strips, Brian. But I want to ask you how come you're not the editorial cartoonist anymore for the Seattle Times, and indeed why there aren't really very many papers anymore. It seems to me. Is that the case?
Yeah. Well, I learned a lesson the hard way that you just don't take home too many pens from the supply cabinet.
They caught you stealing stuff.
Well, no, but I made a mistake of every time I would open the supply cabinet for pens, I would test out the pens and do little doodles. So I was leaving evidence. But no, I'm no longer there. That was a different career, another day, another age.
Were you fired? I mean,
Oh yeah. Fortunately, I have a large enough rear end that the kick out the door they think it hurts.
Well, was
but-
it a particular cartoon that you drew? Was that?
Well, I drew the publisher without clothes and the editorial page. Well, I won't go into that. No, I think it was a combination of a lot of things. New editorial page editor came on board, and she inherited me as she did other members of the staff. And I think they wanted to, she and Frank Blethyn, the publisher, wanted to maybe make the page over in a new image, but they went about removing people without, without good cause. And so it turned into a pretty nasty battle, and I don't have very positive feelings. I have some very, very good friends still at the Seattle Times, and unfortunately, more and more of the good people are leaving.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Is it the obligation, or, is it the expectation of an editorial cartoonist that they share, at least in large part, the philosophy, the politics of the editorial board of the newspaper?
Well, Pat, you raise a good question, which is nobody really knows, meaning the editorial cartoonist is one of those jobs where the product is extremely subjective, judged by people who don't do what the cartoonist does. In fact, to give you an example, in the Pulitzer Prize Committee, which our good friend Mr. Dave Horsey won a couple years ago.
Right.
It still is, it's one of the toughest positions to win in the sense that every other category is judged by people who do what the entrant is submitting.
So if somebody's judging
a photography or editorial writing or
fellow photographer.
Right.
Yeah.
But in editorial cartooning, it's always judged by people who never do what we do and never have the deadlines and the pressures, and they're trying to convey what we're trying to say. Because it's kind of unwritten, meaning if you're going for a job as an editorial cartoonist, there isn't anything more that says you will supply 5 editorial cartoons a week on a professional manner and basis and blah, blah, blah. That's really your job description. When it comes down to, what makes a good political cartoonist, that's like, the Supreme Court decision on whatever pornography is.
And maybe because so few people understand what a political cartoonist is all about, that's why the position, at least in that case, seemed superfluous.
Right. My fear as a foreign political cartoonist is now that more and more editorial page editors are not, quote, journalists from the ground up. They're more playing the role of administrator. We're living in a PC world where you don't want anything, that's controversial. You don't want to lose.
You don't want to affect circulation.
That's exactly right. Now, in the old days, the editorial page editor, you would pick up the phone and tell the person on the other end they'll cancel the subscription for them. They stood behind their cartoonists, whether it was an opinion the editorial page editor agreed with or not. They knew that their editorial cartoonist was an independent voice, and they wanted that to be heard.
Different times.
Yeah.
But I love the way that you have adapted and done other things with your talents, and we'll talk more about that in our next half hour with Brian Basset. Let's check the roads again, though, now. Here's Mr. Tosh one more time.
Well, we're still looking. I'll try to be quick then. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Clem.
Thank you for taking my call.
You should have left that part out. And we would...
Mr. Bassett, you're just the coolest.
Oh, thanks, Clem.
And I often think about being a cartoonist.
What would be so cool about that?
Well, there's 10 cool things.
Oh, really? Okay, then what a coincidence that this would be the top 10 cool things about being a cartoonist.
Right. Number 10, if you forget to wear your pants to work, no problem.
Yeah. Number 9.
If you make a dumb mistake, you can just tell people you're working on material for your strip.
Yeah. That's 2.
Number 8.
You're rarely hounded by autograph seekers.
Yeah, right.
Number 7.
If a waiter is rude, you can threaten to put him in a strip.
I do that with my kids.
Number 6.
At parties, no one asks you for career advice.
That is true, isn't it? These are the top 10 cool things about being a cartoonist. Number 5.
You get paid for making fun of your kids.
Yeah.
Number 4.
You get to use crayons at work.
Number 3.
Chicks dig artists.
Yeah.
Number 2.
If your child needs help with their math homework, you can say, "Hey, I'm a cartoonist."
And the number 1 cool thing about being a cartoonist.
If you're a sycophantic toady, it's because you want to be.
That pretty much right, all in all of those points?
8 of 10.
Somebody has noticed that you sound a little bit like KOMO weather guy Todd Johnson.
Well, that's because out in Issaquah, where I live, it's going to be 78 and sunny today with a little bit of traffic.
Oh, man.
Now you need to say, first for local news, I'm Todd Johnson, KOMO 4 News.
Whap it.
That's creepy. That's creepy.
First for local news, Todd Johnson.
Yeah, not with a question mark, though, like he would say.
First with local news is Todd Johnson.
You got to work on it.
Yeah.
You got to get that
Keep the day job.
First for local news, I'm Todd Johnson. Come on. Something to work on, Brian.
Man.
Could be a second epiphany.
Yeah.
I'm going into space time. You're just jealous.
Well, be sure and write.
I'll draw.
I'll take over your strip if something should go wrong.
Hey, if there are any doodles in the John in the International Space Station,